As you can see, we're standing in front of the Museo Fonck. Looks like a school group is here. There's Jeff talking with our friend Kati. Katarina is her name. Arqueológica. Look what we have here. I heard that Easter Island is requesting the statue to be sent back to Easter Island or Rapanui. Moai del Ahu, One Makai Rapanui.
While I don't consider myself to be an expert in all things Easter Island, I have in the past, Vanessa and I had traveled to Easter Island, Ilha de Pascua, also known as Rapanui, and more called Rapanui. One of the most distinctive features of Rapanui are the Moai statuary. As far as I recall, there are only 3 Moai found in the world outside of Rapanui itself. One is located at the Smithsonian Institute. Another is located in England at one of the museums there, the British Museum. And this third one, which stands right outside of the Museo here in Valparaiso. Moai were essentially the focal point of the spiritual consciousness of the Rapanui people. The Moai were an expression in creative art of what they were shooting for as a people, which was called mana, or mana. Moai gave power to whoever could erect them. Typically, they shaped the Moai out of tuff, which is a compressed form of volcanic ash found at Rano Rariku on the island. Rano Rariku itself looked like a navel in the earth, and the island was called Tapita o Tehenua because it was considered to be the navel or central point of the world. If you notice the construction of the Moai, they have very smooth lines. They were shaped out of tuff using adzes. It was usually a work crew of 5 or 6 or 7 craftsmen who would get down into the tuff at Rano Rariku, which basically was a caldera that was exuding volcanic ash, collected it and turned it into this kind of stone. They would take obsidian adzes and they would shape the Moai using muscle strength. To get a Moai commissioned, you had to pay them in fish. The workmen worked very, very hard. They needed lots of protein. So what would happen is, if you were a wealthy Easter Islander of power, you would condition a Moai, or commission a Moai based on an immediate ancestor, an ancestor who demonstrated mana, or power. And what you'd have to do first is you'd have to employ fishermen to go out and fish for the protein that you would use to pay the craftsman, and the craftsman would work for up to a month, shaping the outside of the Moai and then relieving the Moai from the crater. So the backs of the Moai, when we walk around, you'll see is like a dorsal fin, which was the leftover remnant of the Moai statuary inside after it came out of Rano Rariku.
This says Cultura Rapanui. Now this is intriguing. We never saw anything like this on Easter Island.
Once a Moai was finished, it was very, very important that you follow a ritual in order to install it. The ritual involved carefully managing and handling the Moai in a very reverential manner as you transport it over several kilometers of the island's terrain. It also involved having to be able to move a Moai, especially the larger ones, using trunks of trees typically as roller bearings. So they would roll the moai on the backs of these stumps, the trunks of the trees, which were very round like bearings. Now, there is a tradition among the Rapanui that when the moai were moved, they were moved upright, which meant the base of the moai down there, set on concrete, was actually put on top of these trees, and they would have ropes and guides to move the moai into position. Personally, I do not believe this is true. I believe it was only true when they got to the last stages of installation of a moai. Moai were a very specific form of cultural evolution, specific to Rapanui, to Tapita o Henua. Moai were not found anywhere else among the Polynesian islands, but what you did find along the Polynesian islands were the ahu. Now, this is not a traditional ahu. This is a piling up of rocks around a concrete base. But a traditional ahu on Easter Island was shaped like a boat, very long and narrow, which was also the shape of the domiciles on the island. So the ahu was a sacred place where people could practice their religion. And their religion, like many Asiatics, had to do with ancestral worship. Eventually, the moai were used as a way of declaring political power on the island. The original colonists of Easter Island were Maori, who came and they established families. Typically, I believe 12 different families came over on the waka, or sea-sailing canoes that were constructed out of large trees found on whatever island they had left. So when the Easter Islanders arrived in their waka, they divided up the island to 12 sections. Each section was presided over by a pair of patriarchs and a matriarch. Good.
Oh, here's a tablet. The Runga Roko writing is the most remarkable expression of the Rapanui culture. Read from left to right, turning the tablet to the end of each line. Recognize human figures depicted on different body positions, animals, plants, stars, and geometric figures.
The patriarch and matriarch of the various clans, of which there were 12, then had to determine who was going to be the supreme tribe on the island to dominate its political landscape. And typically the way it is said that this was done is that every couple of years a different clan would cut a stone out of Ranureraku, shaped as a moai, and the moai would be transported overland and established on a sacred ahu like this. But each moai had to be larger and larger than the previous in order to establish that clan as the dominant clan in the island until the next, even larger moai was transported. This required even more and more use of trees on the island.
Aquí ven el método de construcción. Según el estudio arqueológico, para poder hacer un moai se metían un grupo de gente de entre 8 y 12 personas que eran expertos.
Ready? Trees on the island were not just used for the establishment of moai. They were a relative of the giant wine palm, which is associated with the country we're in now, Chile. But it's different, slightly different species. Trees were also used in the cremation ceremonies associated with the death of revered elders. So when people died, they not only cut down the trees also for use in the rituals of interment of the elders. And beyond that, of course, Easter Island is not a very warm island. It's actually quite cool. So they had to use trees to warm their homes, their domiciles.
dentro de cuevas donde ellos sabían que había mucho basalto. Entonces van haciendo como montes dentro de la cueva.
If you look at the details of a moai, you'll notice something. First off, you have, of course, the cabeça or head. The heads are looking outward. They're not looking down, they're not looking up, they look outward. Next, you'll notice the arms. And if you trace the arms, you'll find the hands are placed over the sacral region of the body. And the reason why they were placed there is because these ancients, in my estimation, were old and they no longer had children, but their children became the islanders themselves. In addition, placing the hands over the sacral center basically meant that the procreative energies of the sacral center were lifted up into creative efforts. And the creative efforts we're referring about are the moai themselves. So the statues are basically saying, hey look, if you want to erect a moai, you're going to have to be sexually abstinent for a period of time in order to accumulate the vital forces, the libido necessary to have the mana power essential to being able to quarry, transport, and erect a moai. So we're going to do a walk around of the moai and see if there's any other features that might be of note.
You can see the pebbles in the stone.
If you come around back, you'll see there's no dorsal ridge on the back of this moai. And the way to explain this is not a particularly massive version of a moai. It was selected because it was easily taken from the island and transported here to Chile. If it had been a very tall moai, and they got as tall as 70 feet, or about 20 meters, they would have had to work very hard to cut the moai out of the tuff in Rapanui, and they typically left a dorsal ridge on the back. This one lacks a dorsal ridge, and in my estimation, therefore, is a fairly old moai. And as we walk around, I will tell you a few more things about the moai. The moai themselves were stationed on the island, not looking out towards the sea, as we might suspect, but they were stationed to look inward, to look into the island. Because what they did is they acted as an inspiration, as an overseer, as someone who could look upon the people and inspire them to do the right thing, to do the good thing, to live in harmony with one another, because their ancestors were watching.
Is Jeff probably giving a history lesson to these kids? Bernie!
They asked me who we voted for. I couldn't remember because there's so much craziness going on. Bernie Sanders!
Bernie Sanders.
Hay un guía ahí
No. Oh, I don't have it.
¿Tiene billetes de Estados Unidos?
No.
They want a Jeff and I kiss.
Eso es especialmente dinero
Money.
construir desde arte, made of art.
¿Cuáles son los billetes de su país?
Sí. Okay. Imaginar un dinero
$1.
you make.
$1.
No, not counterfeit. You paint. Can you explain how to make your own money?
Me lo va a regalar.
You.
Un recuerdito.
Este dinero norte.
Y que los artistas lo pintan y luego lo intercambian para, por ejemplo, huevos, harina, lo que sea. Y esas monedas sirven como su moneda, aunque solo es como, aunque no es moneda real. ¿Ya?
Intercambiar.
Sí, po. Un trueque. Sí,
Sí.
sí. Eso es la idea, para que los artistas y toda esa gente también no se muera, no se muera su trabajo. Sí, pues.
Buena idea. Buena idea. Buena idea. Okay, pass four around. Pass. Share. Now.
Abuela, oye, dijimos la escuela y se lo mandamos
Sigo para tener algo de revuelto de parte.
You share. Pass around.
Ah, espera, ¿queréis que saliera eso?
Kathy here reminded me of something very important. Though the Moai this particular Moai was originally disinterred from Easter Island for shipment to Valparaiso, it did end up in the town of
Vino Del Mar.
Vino Del Mar, where the Fonck Museum is located.
And why did it end up here instead?
Why
Don't-
I don't know. I couldn't tell.
Oh, you don't know.
In examining this Moai in more detail, the particular textures on its surface are not really suggestive of tuff. And we're beginning to question whether or not this is actually a Moai or a Moai replica. So, in fact, this could be a replica of a Moai that is now located somewhere else, and we would have to do some research to find that out. Because it's very unusual to find such a valued artifact just exposed for public viewing like this. But the essentials are there of what the Moai appear like.